Well, where were you on August 16th, 1977? I imagine some of you may not even have been born on that day. I remember where I was on August 16th, 1977, not because of what happened in my life that day, but because of someone's death that day. August 16th, 1977 is the day that Elvis Presley died. Or did he? I mean, according to the internet, there are some who claim that Elvis didn't die that day, and I have never known the internet to lie to me. For starters, conspiracy theorists claim that Elvis's name is spelled incorrectly on his tombstone. Elvis's current resting place is between his father and his grandmother, not beside his mother like he adamantly had requested. Some claim that the body in Elvis's casket didn't look like him. They said it looked like a wax figure and his sideburns were falling off, they said. Even though he weighed 250 pounds at the time of his death certificate lists him at a spry 170 pounds. And the death certificate, don't get me started on the death certificate. I mean, the original one disappeared, and the current death certificate lists him at was dated 2 months after his actual death. And to add to the mystery, since his death, there have been so-called Elvis sightings all over the world. Could Elvis still be alive? Actually, some believe it. In fact, in Australia, somebody started the Church of Elvis the Divine. There are some people who wonder if what happened to Elvis some 39 years ago is the same thing that happened to Jesus 2,000 years ago. What evidence is there for the resurrection of Jesus Christ? Can a rational, grounded, facts-based individual be a proponent of the resurrection hypothesis? Let's look at the historical facts as modern scholarship knows them. Now, in my presentation today, I am not treating the New Testament as a set of inspired holy scriptures. Don't get me wrong, I do believe that the New Testament is inspired and holy scripture, but that's not how I'm treating them today. I'm not treating them as special documents. Instead, I'm treating the New Testament documents as modern scholars and historians treat them, as ancient documents that have been handed down and scrutinized for centuries. Now, many who are unfamiliar with the state of New Testament scholarship have the mistaken impression that the textual reliability of the New Testament documents is somehow suspect. They'll say, oh, you don't really know what was written. It's been passed down and copied so many times, it's lost its meaning. In reality, nothing could be further from the truth. Let me illustrate this fact with a comparison. When a history professor quotes from the writings of Aristotle, you don't doubt that Aristotle actually wrote those words, and for good reason. Do we have the original document that Aristotle wrote? No, of course we don't. He wrote his writings somewhere between 384 and 322 BC. So of course we don't have the originals. They've long ago decayed. We only have copies of copies of copies of copies of copies. In fact, the earliest copies we have is from 1100 AD, meaning we don't have the originals. The earliest copy we have is 1400 years later. Now, we have 49 copies to compare, and the more copies you have, the better, because if you just have one copy, well, how do I know if this copy has copied it correctly? If I've got two, okay, I can compare, but I still don't know which one is right. If I have three, two agree and one disagrees. If I have 10, okay, now it's even better. I have more to compare with. The more, the better. Well, we have 49 copies, albeit 1400 years from the original, but historians tell us that you can safely read Aristotle believing that you have a good representation of his words. Perhaps the most widely attested non-religious ancient document would be the Iliad by Homer. Not Homer Simpson, but Homer the ancient poet. Now, it was written in 900 BC, so we certainly don't have the original. The earliest copy we have is from about 400 BC. Now that's great. That's only 500 years from the original lost document, which is much closer than the 1400 years with Aristotle. And what's more, we have 643 copies to compare. So we are well certain that the Iliad we have today is very close to the Iliad that was written some 3,000 years ago. In fact, scholars consider this combination of only 500 years and 643 copies to be historical bedrock. Okay, well, how do the New Testament documents compare to these two well-accepted ancient documents? The New Testament documents were written between 50 and 90 AD. The earliest copies we have were written in 130 AD. That is a span of 40 years. Not 1,400 years like Aristotle, not 500 years like Homer, but 40 years. In ancient history terms, that's equivalent to a photocopy. Now, what about the numbers of documents that we have? Well, remember that Aristotle's 49 and Homer's 643 are the gold standard. Well, when it comes to the New Testament manuscripts, we have over 24,000 copies. The simple truth is that the New Testament is the best attested document in ancient history, both in terms of the number of manuscripts and the nearness of the copies to the originals. In fact, modern reconstructions of the New Testament text have been done, and we now have it's been firmly established that by scholars and historians that 99.8% of the New Testament is accurate to the original documents. That's incredible. Think in these terms. There are 138,000 Greek words in the New Testament. New Testament was originally written in ancient Greek. There are 138,000 Greek words. And of those 138,000 Greek words, scholars are absolutely certain, 100% certain, of 136,600 of them. There are only 1,400 words that are uncertain. And those 1,400 words represent minor issues such as, now, did John say in 1 John 1 that your joy may be full, or did he say that our joy may be full? Your, ours, we're not sure. No doctrine or anything of any historical significance is represented in those 1,400 words. Sir Frederick Kenyon, director and principal librarian of the British Museum, wrote this, I quote, "Any doubts that the scriptures have come down to us substantially as they were written has now been removed. Both the authenticity and the general integrity of the books of the New Testament may be regarded as finally established." Dr. Anthony Flew, at the time he was an atheist, scholar, historian, and philosopher, he stated this in a published debate on the subject of the resurrection that I have in my library. He wrote this, "The textual authority, the earliness and number of manuscripts for most of the Christian documents is unusually great." So, despite the uninformed ranting of the odd internet blogger, internet infidel, when we deal with the claims around the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, we're not playing a game of telephone where rumors have grown over the centuries. We are dealing with claims that can be traced literally to first century contemporaries and even in some cases eyewitnesses. Now, historians reached a consensus years ago, long ago, regarding the existence of Jesus. If someone says to you, "Oh, we don't even know if Jesus existed," they have no idea what they're talking about. The 19th and early 20th century proposition that this man Jesus was merely a legend was long ago put to pasture by modern scholarship and archaeology. Dr. Edwin Yamauchi of Miami University, a leading expert in ancient history, stated the following, I quote him, "We have better historical documentation for Jesus than for the founder of any other ancient religion." Now, I've discovered that while many people understand that the existence of Jesus is a historical fact, they mistakenly think that the resurrection of Jesus is something that you just have to believe by a leap of faith. This is not true. The resurrection of Jesus is equally a matter of dealing with historical evidence. When it comes to the historical record, there are essentially 4 established facts, recognized by the vast majority of New Testament scholars, critics, and historians today, which I would put to you are best explained by the resurrection of Jesus. Now remember, these 4 facts I'm about to present to you are not in dispute. In fact, for the last 8 years out in Vancouver, I'm invited by local universities every Easter, it seems, to come and present the evidence, this presentation I'm giving to you today, to present it to students. This year I did it to a faculty of professors and so on at one of the Capilano University, and to Simon Fraser University as well. I presented this material, and it's not refuted. What I'm sharing with you is not controversial. These are established facts. These 4 facts are not debated. These 4 facts are agreed upon, even by those who would deny or doubt that Christ rose from the dead. Think of these 4 facts as 4 concrete clues that history detectives have to work with. Here we go. Historical fact number 1. After his crucifixion, Jesus was buried in the tomb of a man named Joseph of Arimathea. Now, Joseph of Arimathea was a member of the Jewish Sanhedrin, an ancient Jewish law court. It was the court that sentenced Jesus to death and convinced the Romans to have him crucified. The ancient documents declare that after Jesus' death, he was embalmed and then buried in a tomb donated by this member of the Jewish Sanhedrin. Now, historians find this fact to be highly credible due to what they refer to as the embarrassment factor. What do we mean? Well, by that they mean that it is highly unlikely that this is a later legendary addition or legendary embellishment, since you have one of the enemies of the early church, a member of the judicial body that had Jesus killed, acting in a heroic manner. Early Christians inventing the story that Joseph of Arimathea buried Jesus would be like a modern Israeli inventing a story of Hitler secretly rescuing Jewish children from concentration camps. It wouldn't happen. For this, among other reasons, historians agree, after his crucifixion, Jesus was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. Historical fact number 2. On the Sunday following his death, the tomb of Jesus Christ was found to be empty by his women followers. Now grasp this, folks, because people outside these walls don't realize this. The empty tomb is actually a fact of history. Now, historians will wonder and even debate about how the tomb became empty, but they do not wonder or debate if the tomb was empty. The fact that the tomb was found empty by a group of women followers was another powerful sign of authenticity to ancient historians, again, due to what they call the embarrassment factor. Well, what's so embarrassing about women being the first ones to find the tomb empty? I'm just a messenger, so don't get angry at me. But as distasteful as it is to our modern sensibilities, the testimony of women was not acceptable in ancient Jewish courts. Women were simply not trusted as reliable witnesses. An invented account of the circumstances surrounding the empty tomb would certainly not have the first witnesses to be women. An invented account would have Peter or John or some other group of powerfully important and influential men to be the first eyewitnesses. But the fact that the manuscripts record that it was women who first witnessed the empty tomb is a strong sign of unvarnished, honest testimony. Historical fact number 3. On separate, multiple occasions, different individuals and groups of individuals, including 500 people at one time, saw what they claimed to be appearances of Jesus alive after his death. Now, these appearances were witnessed not just by believers, and that's important as we'll learn in a moment, but also by unbelievers, by skeptics, and even by enemies of Christ. This is an important fact because any appeal to hallucinations or wish fulfillment simply does not fit the historical facts. As one example, the facts behind the story of the man known as Saul of Tarsus, how we as Christ followers know as the Apostle Paul, who wrote much of the New Testament, is a crucial piece of history that skeptics must address. Saul was a Jewish religious scholar, and by his own account, he was a zealot who was an enemy of early Christ followers. Saul terrorized the early church. Think of him as a first century ISIS leader. He hunted down and he killed first century Christians. While on one of his seek and destroy missions, Saul claimed to have had an encounter with the resurrected Jesus. And this encounter instantly changed the direction of Saul's life. In literally an instant, Saul turned from being a killer of Christians to being a follower of Christ. Now, this would be akin to Osama bin Laden being the leader of Al-Qaeda at 11 a.m. and being in President Obama's cabinet at 11:01 a.m. Historians marvel what could cause such a powerful, radical, instant turnaround. Saul claimed that he met the resurrected Christ, and he would later die because of that claim. Scholars are in agreement that the historical record reports multiple early and independent eyewitness accounts. These multiple early independent testimonies, even eyewitness testimony from enemies and combatants, must be accounted for. Historical fact number 4. The original disciples suddenly came to believe in the resurrection of Jesus despite having no expectation of it. As one scholar put it, you need a sufficient launching pad to explain the launch of this missile called Christianity. And it can't be a gradual ramp of legend being built up over decades or generations. It was an instant liftoff. Men and women who were one day hiding and cowering and denying that they even knew Jesus were the next day willing to die for the claim that he had risen from the dead. Something happened, literally in an instant, that must be explained. Now, it's important to understand that the original disciples had absolutely no expectation of a dying and rising Messiah. Today, in the 21st century, when we think Messiah, we think, yeah, Messiah is someone who rose from the dead. Yeah, that's us. That's not them. That wasn't first century Jewish thinking at all. The Messiah dying was like Superman dying. It was unthinkable. A dying Messiah was an oxymoron. Add to that the fact that according to Jewish law, Jesus' method of death was considered evidence that he was under God's curse, not that he was the Messiah. Plus, add to that the fact that Jewish belief in the afterlife did not anticipate anyone being resurrected until the very end of the world, and you come to the realization that the resurrection of Jesus was a completely unanticipated event, even though he tried to let them know it was going to happen. It just went in one ear, out the other. It didn't fit with their understanding of reality. As scholar Dr. N.T. Wright put it, in the first century, when your Messiah died, you either went home or you went and got yourself a new Messiah. Now, if you want to be rational, you need to deal with the facts. When you're rational, facts are your friends. Well, what are the facts of this case? Here's what we know. Here is what is not disputed. Historical fact number 1, after his crucifixion, Jesus was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. Historical fact number 2, on the Sunday following his death, the tomb of Jesus Christ was found to be empty by his women followers. Historical fact number 3, on separate, multiple occasions, different individuals and groups of individuals, including 500 people at one time, saw what they claimed to be appearances of Jesus alive after his death. And historical fact number 4, the original disciples suddenly came to believe in the resurrection of Jesus despite having no expectation of it. Here's the thing. Every naturalistic explanation, meaning non-supernatural explanation, attempted over the last 2,000 years to explain these historical facts has been universally rejected by contemporary scholarship. Now understand this, and this is an area that I have devoted 35 years of my life to investigating and studying. There is not one single naturalistic theory that is able to explain all of the known historical facts of the case. Not one. So what are the competing theories to the eyewitness claims of Jesus' first followers that he rose from the dead? What rational alternatives has 2,000 years worth of skepticism produced? If you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus Christ, you have to buy into one of these 5, actually 6 theories that I'm quickly going to touch on in our last 12 minutes together. First of all, there's the theft theory. This is the theory that the Sanhedrin first proposed 2,000 years ago. And they said this: while we were sleeping, the disciples came and stole the body. Well, what are the problems with that theory? Well, there are plenty. Do you mean the same disciples who hid when Jesus was arrested, shrank from a woman's accusation around a campfire, and were too afraid to even claim Jesus' body? These guys suddenly conspired to steal the body and to make up a resurrection story that they didn't even anticipate? Oh, and by the way, how do sleeping guards identify people? I mean, it wouldn't take a great prosecutor or cross-examiner to come to expose this. So, Claudius, Roman soldier, you claim that while you were sleeping, the disciples came and stole the body. Yes, that's true. Well, Claudius, tell me, what is your typical sleeping position? I lay on my back or side. Okay, and are your eyes open or closed typically when you sleep? My eyes are closed, of course. You think I'm stupid? No, Claudius, I don't think you're stupid. Listen, Claudius, assume your sleeping position. Show me your eyes when you normally sleep. Claudius closes his eyes. Now, Claudius, maintain that sleeping position. Yes, your eyes are closed. Yes, of course. Now, Claudius, how many fingers am I holding up? I have no idea. Why not? Because my eyes are closed, you dummy. Of course, Claudius. Now, I go back to your testimony. You said that while you were sleeping, the disciples stole the body. How do you know that if your eyes were closed, Claudius? Another problem is, what about the resurrection appearances? This doesn't explain, the disciples stealing the body does not explain the appearances to hundreds of people, even enemies of Jesus. And does an outright lie explain the disciples' lives from that day afterwards? If they died for a lie, what did they gain? They didn't go on a book tour. They weren't on Oprah. They didn't make any money. In fact, they lost everything, lost their lives, many of them. And some people say, oh yeah, but other people from other religions were martyred too, you know. So just because somebody dies doesn't mean that necessarily what they died for is true. That is true, but you're missing the point. Many will die for what they believe to be true, but who would die for what they know to be a lie? Very few. Some might, and other religions might die because they've been told that something's happened and they're willing to believe that. But you're claiming that the disciples made up a lie and then were willing to die and even have their loved ones killed because of their lie. And they didn't make money. What were they gaining by this lie? The theft theory has not been proposed as a viable alternative for nearly 2,000 years. Secondly, then, there's the no burial theory. This is the theory that the body of Jesus was thrown into a pit, not into a tomb. The Romans crucified thousands of people. I mean, it was a sport for them. They literally crucified tens of thousands of people. So it is true that they would often then just take down the bodies and throw them in a pit. They wouldn't bury them. Joseph of Arimathea's decision and request was very unusual. And so they're saying, Jesus' body was thrown into a pit, but the women went to a tomb thinking his body was there. They saw it was empty, and they made a mistake. Yeah, he's risen from the dead. No, he was just in a pit. Well, if that's true, then why wouldn't the Romans say, hey, ladies, stop. All you folks, stop all this preaching about resurrection. No, look he's in a pit. There he is. Claudius, point out the body. Oh, yeah, there he is. He's in that pit. Oh, sorry, our mistake. And again, this doesn't explain the resurrection appearances to hundreds of people, including enemies of Jesus. This theory was never a serious consideration and has absolutely no modern-day support as a viable alternative. Thirdly is what's called the wrong tomb theory. This is the theory that says the women accidentally went to the wrong tomb on Easter morning. Women, directions, you know. Again, I'm just the messenger. And so what happened Easter morning, they went to the graveyard, and instead of turning right, they went left, and they saw a tomb that was empty. Woohoo, he's risen from the dead. They ran and told everyone, when in reality, they went to the wrong tomb. Well, if that's the case, again, why wouldn't the Romans say, stop the music, time out? No, ladies, sorry, you went to the wrong tomb. He's not there. He's in this tomb. Claudius, roll the stone back. Show the ladies. Oh, yeah, ooh, there he is. Oh, he's beginning. Yes, thanks. Okay, I'm sorry, close the tomb. And again, this doesn't explain all the resurrection appearances. This theory never got any traction, has no modern day support. Then, fourthly, there's the hallucination theory. This is the theory that the resurrection appearances of Jesus were mere hallucinations. It was wish fulfillment. They so wanted Jesus to be the Messiah that they hallucinated that they saw him alive after his death. What are the problems with this theory? Well, if that's the case, why wouldn't the Romans produce the body and end all the hallucinating? Claudius, I know you're tired. Your arms must be sore, but open that tomb again. There we go. See, he didn't rise from the dead. There he is. He's in there again. So stop all this hallucinating, folks. This theory also doesn't fit the facts for Jesus' appearances to the disciples as a group, particularly, or 500 people. Now think about this. I can have a hallucination. You 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 can have one. You can have one. You can have one. You can have them in the balcony, but we can't network our hallucinations. We have them as individuals. And besides all that, it doesn't explain the appearances to Jesus' enemies and combatants. Preconditioning is a major factor in hallucinations. This theory doesn't fit the facts regarding the state of mind of the disciples who weren't expecting Jesus to rise from the dead, or James, Jesus' brother, who was not a follower of Christ when Jesus walked the earth. In fact, James said of his brother, he's out of his mind. Yet Jesus made a resurrection appearance to him. And James became a follower of Jesus, wrote the book of James that we have, and Josephus records that James died a martyr for his faith. And it doesn't explain the resurrection appearances to Paul, Saul of Tarsus. When one has a hallucination, besides all that, involving a deceased person, you don't take that hallucination as a sign that the person is alive, but as confirmation that they're dead. This theory was proposed in the early 20th century. However, scholars like Friedrich Schleiermacher, Heinrich Paulus, and Theodor Keim investigated the claims and evidence and finally destroyed it as a viable theory in the early 1960s. I'm not aware of any modern scholarly support or historical support for this theory today. Then, number 5, there's the swoon theory. This is a theory that some of our Islamic friends will propose. And this is the theory that Jesus only fainted on the cross, and he resuscitated in the cool tomb, and he escaped. Now, what are the problems with this theory? Well, they're plentiful. Crucifixion is essentially death by asphyxiation. You suffocate to death. How so? Well, when you're on the cross, your feet are nailed, your hands are nailed, and gravity pulls you down like this. And so you push up on the nails on your hands and feet, and you breathe, and then you hang down again, and you're constricted and restricted in your chest. So you push up again, try to breathe, and you hang down, and you're exhausted, up and down, which is why they broke the legs of the thieves on the cross as a way of speeding up death so they couldn't push up and breathe, and they would die sooner. Jesus was beaten. He was whipped 39 times. He carried a wooden crossbeam through the city. He was nailed through his hands and his feet to this cross. He hung there for 6 hours. He was stabbed in the side of the chest to ensure that he was dead. So he didn't respond. He didn't react to the stabbing. And then out came blood and water, which we now realize is a sign that the pericardium and the aorta were pierced. And after a physical examination by the Roman soldiers, whose job it was to crucify and kill people, and if a Roman soldier allowed someone to come down off a cross alive, that soldier would be crucified. They knew to make sure people were dead. They pronounced him dead. And then he was embalmed, wrapped up like a mummy, placed in this tomb, not in the ground, but in a cave. A giant stone sealed that cave. But let's go with the theory for a moment. Let's pretend we believe it. So, what this theory says is inside that cave, Jesus, who was catatonic, a mild coma, comes out of the catatonic state. He comes out of the coma. He wakes up, embalmed, wrapped up in this mummy-like thing. Somehow, he gets the bandages off. And with his nail-pierced hands, nail-pierced feet, ankles, his whipped and beaten back, whipped and beaten face and body, Jesus, all by himself, from inside the tomb, pushes the stone away. Sneaks past the guards. His emaciated, beaten body, he appears to the disciples and says, "You too can have a body like this someday." This inspires them. And he's never seen again. That's the swoon theory. Well, David Strauss and Albert Schweitzer delivered the death blow to this theory. And I'm not aware of any contemporary historians or New Testament scholars that subscribe to this theory. That's it. Oh, except one more. Dr. William Lane Craig is the leading apologist, leading debater and defender of the faith in the world today. And at Broadway in Vancouver, we had the privilege of hosting him a couple years ago, and I got to spend some time with him. I said, "So Bill, tell me, what's the state of the art when it comes to skeptical theories about the resurrection?" He said, "You won't believe it." He said, "I just recently had a debate against a guy in the University of California, professor at the University of California. He was a professor who's an atheist who did his doctoral thesis on a skeptical response to the resurrection. So this is state of the art." He said, here was this guy's argument. The skeptic's response to the facts was that Jesus must have had a long-lost, unknown, identical twin brother who was separated at birth. And this long-lost, identical twin brother who was separated at birth just happened to arrive in Jerusalem during Christ's trial and death. And this long-lost, identical twin brother who was separated at birth then stole Christ's body from the grave, passed himself off as Jesus to everyone. Why you'd want to pass yourself off as a condemned, killed criminal, I don't know, but that's what he did. And then he disappeared, never to be seen again. I think we are officially scraping the bottom of the barrel of that one. But if you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus, you have to choose one of those theories. Can a rational person accept the resurrection of Jesus? I would respectfully put to you that if by rational you mean dealing with the facts and following where the evidence actually leads you, the only explanation that factors in all of the known historical facts is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's why it seems to me that a follower of Jesus is historically and intellectually justified in both believing and declaring that Jesus rose from the dead, proving that he was who he claimed to be, God come to earth in flesh. Dr. N.T. Wright, an eminent British scholar, concludes, and I quote him. He said, "As a historian, I cannot explain the rise of early Christianity unless Jesus rose again, leaving an empty tomb behind him." Professor Thomas Arnold, a scholar, author of the famous 3-volume History of Rome, when he was alive, appointed to the chair of modern history at Oxford University, a man well acquainted with the value of evidence in determining historical facts, wrote this concerning the historical evidence for the resurrection of Christ. I conclude with this. He said, "Thousands and thousands of persons have gone through it piece by piece, as carefully as every judge summing up on a most important case. I myself," he said, "have done it many times over, not to persuade others, but to satisfy myself. I have been used for many years to study the histories of other times and to examine and weigh the evidence of those who have written about them. And I know of no one fact in the history of mankind which is proved by better and fuller evidence of every sort to the understanding of a fair inquirer than the great sign which God has given us, that Christ died and rose again from the dead." So as a follower of Jesus Christ, you stand on solid historical and intellectual grounds when you declare that Jesus came, Jesus died, Jesus rose from the dead. Let me conclude by answering any questions. Bill said, give me tough ones. Bring it on. Is there historical evidence of the Old Testament? Oh, certainly, absolutely. The Old Testament is a whole different animal completely, but we do have historical evidence for the Old Testament. But it's a cumulative case as well, in the sense that one of the strongest reasons why I believe the Old Testament is because Jesus believed in the Old Testament. And Jesus is the one who referred to the Old Testament as being reliable, and not one dot or cross beam would fall away without being fulfilled. And so Jesus' resurrection proves Jesus' claims, and so because of that, I then believe what Jesus believed regarding the Old Testament as well. After Jesus' death, did he descend into hell as the Apostles' Creed states? This is a theological debate amongst people, but I have no problem. Myself, my understanding is a possibility that Jesus descended into what we know as hell, as Hades, which was a holding place for the souls of disembodied souls of saints in the Old Testament. So people in the Old Testament weren't saved by their good deeds. They were saved by faith as well. They were looking ahead to the Messiah. We look back to the Messiah. They were looking ahead, so Jesus descended into hell, if you will, where these people were held because they died with faith, but they still had sin. He came, declared that he was the Messiah that they had been waiting for. Their faith grabbed hold of him, and they were released from this place called Hades and are now present with the Lord. I don't have a problem with that theology. You don't have to believe that to be a follower of Jesus, but it is a reliable, it's a rational alternative. How do we know the story of Adam and Eve are true if it was only them who were there? Well, again, this is a matter, what this has to do with the resurrection, I'm not sure. But it's an account, again, that gets passed on for generations. Just Adam and Eve, and by the way, they had many children, so it's not true that just they were there. But the fact that you have 2 eyewitnesses, that would get, if I had 2 people as eyewitnesses of an event, I could get you accused and condemned of anything. if I had 2 eyewitnesses to what you did. So 2 eyewitnesses who record what they saw and what they experienced is completely rational. All right, folks, let me conclude by saying this. As a follower of Jesus Christ, my faith in Christ, my walk with Christ is not based upon the arguments I just gave you. As powerful as they are not the foundation of my experience with God. My walk with Christ is based upon a personal experience with the Spirit of God that I had back in 1981 at 19 years of age. This shows what I know. I already know that Jesus is alive because I have a living relationship with him. And that's not bizarre to base your walk with Christ on your experience with Christ, because you're doing it already when it comes to reality. As you're sitting here right now, how do you know you are not a brain in a vat being stimulated by electrodes by some mad scientist? How do you know you actually exist? How do you know I exist? How do you know that I'm a separate being from you? How do you know that you're not just imagining all of this? Your whole life is a big imagination. How do you know you're not in the Matrix? You can't prove that you are not a brain in a vat being stimulated by electrodes. You simply have to rely on your experience of reality. It's what's called a properly basic belief. Well, it's a properly basic belief that I had an experience and have an ongoing experience with the Spirit of God in my life. I am not irrational. I'm not crazy. I'm a Leaf fan, but I'm not crazy. And I have an ongoing experience with the Spirit of God. He's changed my life. This shows what I already know. But when your experience and history and logic fit together, that's a pretty solid sign of reality. And so I encourage you today, before you leave this place, I challenge you intellectually to face reality and to live according to the facts. But I also would challenge you, if you're not a follower of Jesus, to open your heart to him. Why did he die? Why did he rise from the dead? He paid my moral debt. He paid your moral debt. I deserve to die. The wages that sin pays is death, the Bible says. But the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. So he died and rose again to pay your moral debt and my moral debt.